Hello, I'm Jeremy Sammut, a research fellow here at the Centre for Independent Studies. For the past few years, I've been researching the problems in Australia's child protection system. My latest report, titled "The Fraught Politics of Saying Sorry for Forced Adoption, Implications for Child Protection Policy in Australia," is released by the CIS this week. The short version is that we do too little, too late to protect many children. Child protection services mistakenly believe that children should be removed only as a last, reluctant and temporary resort, and that all effort should be made at nearly all costs to keep families together. For a multitude of reasons, which I summarise in my new report, there are a host of problems with this family preservation approach. Many children caught up in the child protection system would be much better off if they were speedily removed and adopted by good families. This is a very controversial policy recommendation. Adoption is currently taboo in child protection circles because it's seen as being akin to the discredited forced adoption practices that occurred between the 1950s and the mid-1970s. Legal action is never taken to free children from adoption, even when parents are highly dysfunctional and demonstrably unfit. From the 50s to the 70s, the babies of an estimated 150,000 unmarried, mostly teenage mothers, were adopted out to childless married couples. The Federal Parliament, as recommended by the 2012 Senate inquiry into forced adoption, will make a national apology to separated mothers and their children on Thursday this week. The sentiments behind the national apology are good-hearted, and the basic aim is to acknowledge the pain and suffering forced adoption caused. While it is appropriate for the nation to say sorry for forced adoption, malpractices such as not letting unmarried mothers see their babies, we also need to be aware of the politics behind the national apology and the potential implications for child protection policy. What my report shows is that the cause for the national apology have been led by the vocal academics and advocacy groups who form the backbone of the anti-adoption movement in Australia, which maintains that all adoptions in any circumstances, including overseas adoptions, are wrong and harmful to parents and children. The anti-adoption movement argues that having heard the stories told by the victims of forced adoption, we should never again repeat the same mistakes that harmed separated mothers and their stolen children. What this is really saying is that if the apology is sincere, governments must persevere with flawed family preservation policies. I'm concerned about the effect the national apology could have on child protection policy. If the Federal Parliament endorses the anti-adoption movement's position, this will give national prominence and authority to the idea that adoption is illegitimate, just as the anti-adoptionists intend. If this happens, the national apology could add to the political difficulties faced by state and territory governments, especially in New South Wales and Queensland, that are showing interest in using adoption to provide abused and neglected children with good homes. I predict that the opponents of adoption will use the national apology as a stick to beat policymakers with, who I fear will become more reluctant to support adoption to avoid being accused of backtracking on the apology and of once again seeking to steal children. My report aims to short-circuit this foreseeable outcome. It therefore calls on federal MPs and senators to be aware that the national apology could cast doubt on the acceptability of adoption in 21st century Australia. To prevent this, I'm calling on the Federal Parliament to explicitly reject as part of the national apology the idea that all adoptions are inherently harmful and illegitimate. Instead, the Federal Parliament should exercise national leadership on child protection. It should aim to weaken the taboo on adoption by strongly endorsing the use of adoption when children cannot live safely with their parents. The benefits of working in a think tank like the CIS is that you get to talk about politically incorrect things. Supporting adoption in the week of the national apology for forced adoption certainly falls into that category. But my real job as a think tanker is to think up good policy ideas and hope that you can put the right ideas into the hearts, minds, mouths and deeds of politicians. This is what I really hope my report does. If federal parliamentarians take my advice, they will recognise that adoption needs to be supported in the best interests of the most vulnerable children in the community.